I have your attention, please. The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
And greetings, and welcome yet again to another live broadcast of Oz Speaks, Building a New Legacy here with the Crew Podcast. This is season 4. I think it's really important for persons to just take a moment, take a deep breath, reflect, and give thanks as we are coming to those closing days of the month of February, which has had a number of observances in addition to African American Black History Month for some, because we know that African Black history is 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think it's really critical and important that we begin to share some of the various commentary of what has been happening around the globe, around the world, and how we honor and celebrate, observe, commemorate, or even just reflect on all of the things that have transpired that provide the support, the legacy work, the building that we speak of so eloquently. I would like to always start our podcast with words of power, words of praise. So I'm going to say it in English for those persons that may come into this podcast and not know what is she saying. But we give thanks and praise to the one most high by all the names we use that are venerated. So we always give thanks and praise to the one most high. We live each day daily for the one most divine. And we shall do it tomorrow, just as we do it today. In the Meta Nature, the ancestral language of the African ancestral ancient Nubian, Kushyan, Kemetu heritage people, it would sound Amasu and Panter, Sauksu, Emit Kharaf and Panter, Awuda, Maketi Pahirura, Duau, Duau, Entera, Entera. And we're really just giving thanks so that we can start some of our versation tonight on a very high note, vibrating in an elevated space and adding truth as power, not just to power, but truth as power. So when we speak of truth in the form we refer to as Ma'at, a very feminine, ancestral, divine principle that incorporates truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. It just resonates well and it feels powerfully engaging. I also like to highlight that sometimes when we are engaging and moving through this trod of life, that there are always obstacles. There are obstacles that come forward in a variety of ways, obstacles that are geared to prevent us from going into spaces and places that we may not need to go into, protecting us from saying things that are more damaging, not only to self, but to family, to community, to society, to humanity, even, and impacting civilizations globally, just from the word, just from what we speak, and the manner in which we say it. So it is always a powerful space when we get an opportunity to give thanks and honor for being aware, sharing our cognitive strengths and skills on how we acquire knowledge, how we will manifest wisdom, and doing it in a form that is very powerful, very positive, very engaging. There has been a shift, a very significant shift regarding what has surrounded our planetary environment. The fact that some believe that climate change is not real, when the climate is changing, and places and spaces that are usually quite tropical, quite warm, that usually have only two seasons, hurricane season and tropical weather and seasons, are now seeing flurries, are now experiencing cool temperatures that are very similar to the temperate zone, unlike the tropical zone. Just thoughts for us to have in our consciousness. I also take a moment, there's been a number of ancestral transitions, persons passing away. And this is a season as we are moving towards the spring season, or what persons refer to as the vernal equinox, on or about March 22nd. So there's a lot of transition and many people becoming part of the other dimension, what we refer to as an ancestral dimension, that some people refer to as a mensa, as Restau. Some speak of heaven, but many others speak of the earthly paradise. And those that know what I'm speaking to know what I mean. But we take a moment of silence for those that have traversed out of the physical earthly realm into that plane where they are in a space of preparation to return to that spiritual ancestral dimension. So let's just take a moment and breathe together. Most persons are going to remember the national, regional, international, intergenerational human rights, civil rights efforts and work and leadership of Reverend Jesse Jackson. And there are so many powerful tributes being shared around the globe. We honor the great work and the achievements. And this is not a time to speak of his ideological shifts or differences with persons, as I've also seen in primarily in US media, or what we're referring to as media, I should say, in US social media, because in amongst investigative journalists, their focus is on usually on the achievements, the contributions of a person, especially so close to their very recent passing or transition. And we'd like to highlight those things in terms of the walk and trod that he kept, as a young person, around the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the contributions around the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. His work and efforts, some persons say support, some persons say just presence around the Black Panther Party, around the civil rights movement and era, the March on Washington, the efforts, working with and around powerhouses like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And even the fact that of his presence around many persons, some that were removed from the earth, assassinated, executed, exiled, imprisoned. So there are a lot of questions and a lot that surrounds how persons perceive such a great one. And at this particular time, we just send prayers of strength and comforting, healing heart mercies to his family. Because sometimes he moved like he was going to become the centenarian that many would have desired. close, in his 80s. And to live that long after doing that type of grounding work in all the different ways that uplifted our people and humanity. Yes, much of his work was grounded on pushing forward for African Americans. It had an impact and spread out to humanity, though. So some people remember the the Rainbow Coalition. Some people remember Push. There were a number of organizations, institutions that were very positive. So I pause there. And again, when we speak of the achievers, the contributors to our community, to our society, to our humanity, coming through the work and efforts of now a new ancestor making his transition amongst other ancestors, great ones. We call the name of Reverend Jesse Jackson, and again, give our regards to his family. I'm going to shift to a couple of other areas, primarily because we have had the joy and privilege of seeing, and one of my guests that was planning to, and it's probably a connectivity issue plus a time shift because we're Dondada Menelik Nesta Gibbons, a multi platinum award winning artist out of South Africa, Southeast Africa, I should be specific, born in Zimbabwe, um, giving his contributions, love, and strength in Azania, South Africa. The plan was for him to join us tonight, and keeping in mind that the time differences, they're about 7 hours ahead of us, from at least where I'm at here in the Virgin Islands, and which is technically 8 hours ahead from Eastern time. And we're going to really push to have him and some of his colleagues and other artists join us in the future here on the Crew Podcast. That way we can actually have a really robust conversation and keep it moving and flowing and growing and engaging to just learn a little bit more about how music is, as Baba Fela Kuti shared back in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. Music is a weapon. And when we use music accurately, it becomes a weapon of education, of political revolutionary efforts, of economic regeneration, of upliftment, of emotional strength, of holistic healing, and much, much more, in addition to being a creative art form that is a fusion of logic and grammar and rhetoric and architecture and science and all the things that govern our universe. So we're going to really spend some time over the course to really bring some other layers of our conversations into our work. There are a number of things that I had hoped we would have been able to explore tonight as well. And so I'm going to come, I think it's important to just keep in mind that there are a number of organizations in this region that are, and when I say in this region, I'm speaking of the Caribbean Americas for the purposes of this podcast, where, for example, the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago has really been surrounding itself around a number of really powerful work and efforts around various creative arts, calypso competitions. This has been a really robust time for them. And I think it's important, if you're not familiar, I encourage persons to go to emancipation.org emancipationtt.com. Just emancipationtt.com. And that way you can find out a little bit more about the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago and some of the work that they do around, whether it's linked to their Pan African festivals and various commemorations, whether it's around their lecture series that always support African consciousness, whether it's around the reparatory justice and reparations efforts and works that they've been instrumental to, whether it is linked to the observances of the second international decade for people of African descent through the United Nations, that is also partnering with the African Union and other organizations to really push forward recognition, justice, and development in its most pragmatic form in the next decade. There has been a first decade, which was from 2015 to 2024, and many things were started. However, now that there is also a United Nations permanent forum for people of African descent and these other bodies that work on, working group of African experts amongst other entities, the intention is to let more persons know what is actually taking place and how you can be participatory. So, in this region of the Caribbean Americas, you have entities like the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, in addition to the work they do with various school competitions and educational drivers that keep young people at the center of this work, inclusive of their weekly broadcasts on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. It's interesting, it's at the same time as our crew podcast work, but at 8 p.m., and they're always available on YouTube. Indaba, Indaba. They ESCTT also is engaged in heritage tours and works and provides secretariat services and groundings for the Caribbean Pan African Network, which is a coalition. Coalition may not be the best term, but it's an alliance of organizations and members that are involved in supporting and promoting Pan Africanism and Pan African values and Pan African ideological programs throughout the Caribbean Americas, and with representation from the Bahamas all the way as far south as Suriname, Venezuela, Colombia, etc. I think it's important, Isla Catalina, which are some persons don't really understand that there's other parts of the Caribbean, some many English speaking, some Spanish speaking, some French speaking, some Papiamento speaking, some Dutch speaking, some Portuguese speaking, and then all of the creolized languages that exist in these spaces. So we do our best not to let the languages separate us as much as possible to authentically be Pan African in our focus. I think that the other part that I felt was really important to share tonight, since know that this is the time where African Black history is celebrated, is that this is a very good time for us to also speak truth as power on a number of other efforts, a number of other things that are taking place in our global communities. And I speak to some of the things that have been offered and shared. I'm noticing that persons are trying to communicate and send messages, and I just express to persons, because I do not have my invited guest, Dondada Menelik Nesta Gibbons. Those types of questions, please hold them until we are able to confirm another date for him and his colleagues to join us. But we knew the persons were very excited about the possibility, or even the probability, I should say, of being able to hear him, hear his music, and to really see the type of work that is being done on the ground, definitely with some serious boots in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and the impact that it has in global affairs and so forth. I think it's also a very good opportunity. Persons that are not familiar with the CARICOM Reparations Commission. I encourage you to take some time and look at the CARICOM Reparations Commission's website just so that you get an idea of some of the things that are taking place now, because some people really do not know that these things are manifested. You can go to CARICOM, CARICOM, reparations, REPARATIONS.org. Again, CARICOM reparations.org. And there you would be able to see uh, a little more information about the reparations movement, and specifically how the reparations movement has transitioned out of some of the select limitations or lack of proper information throughout the 20th century. Some things are firm and on point. Make sure I say that first. But some of the nuances, some of the techniques and strategies, some of the ongoing work that persons may not be aware of. This is not just a get money from colonizers episode. This is an actual movement, and it is a very strategic, very organized, very institutional, grounded movement to repair the damages done to people of African ancestry, as well as indigenous people in this region on the earth that have experienced the type of marginalization, dehumanization, degradation, exclusion, oppression, repression over the course of centuries, and in some instances, even longer. And I encourage persons to go to CARICOMreparations.org just so that you can see how the formulations are put in place. And I quote this: the Caribbean Reparation Commission outlines the path to reconciliation, truth, and justice for the victims of slavery and their descendants. Just so persons get the fullness. So this is not just an emancipation proclamation, revisitation piece. And this is not just for example, here in 1848, in what was then the Danish West Indies, Africans that were enslaved by the stroke of a pen, so called. From this day, all unfree in the Danish West Indies are free. What does that mean, really? And especially if the quality of life did not improve. And the same thing happened in 1865. Yes, make sure we get these things between 1863, 1865, moving into the 1870s in the United States. You can say in certain areas that enslavement and the enslavement of Africans had ended and they were emancipated. But what did you do to repair the inequities during those hundreds of years of enslavement? And if you promise and offer persons 40 acres and a mule, but you do not ratify it, so only certain select here and there secured some degree of land, might not have even been a whole 40 acres, and in some instances it might have been more. But you definitely didn't give them even the mule. And that just became, again, so many persons thought that everyone got some land, an animal that could help work the land, some resource, some type of remuneration, some type of reciprocity, some type of reconciliation for hundreds of years of enslavement and dehumanization and lynching and rape and more. But that didn't happen. And the situations became harder in many instances, not only in the 48 contiguous US, but throughout the earth. You had places like Hawaii with melanated Hawaiians that were royals. And even one of the last queens was forced into exile and forced to abdicate her throne to facilitate what persons like to refer to as another state of the United States of America, Hawaii. Don't believe me. Do the research. And that's an easy Google or easy for those that like to keep using ChatGPT, but you want to check the citations given. Just ask. Last queen in Hawaii. Queen forced to abdicate her throne in Hawaii. And we'll begin to see that reparatory justice, reparations, reconciliation for the wrongs done to people of African, indigenous, ancestral legacies and ancestry. Hmm, it's beyond time. And this is a great opportunity for us to speak about some of those things. And again, as I've shared before, there are a number of organizations, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, Rehabilitating Committee 2020. I know it's long. So, for the purposes of tonight's podcast, UNIA ACL RC 2020. I need you to just ponder on this. We speak of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. We reference and highlight the achievements of his leadership, his guidance, his ability to organize and lead millions, more than 4.5 million in terms of archival record, and in some archival record, persons say it exceeded 6 million in the early 1900s, between 1914 and 1927, well, say like for sure 1930, 1935, before his premature death in 1940. I think it's important to just reflect on that. Who was Marcus Garvey and why is African fundamentalism, why is the African liberation flag so important? When we speak of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, if we are speaking truth is power, then we have to speak of his first wife, who started the UNIA ACL with him in Jamaica, Amy Ashwood Garvey. Another powerful, internationally well traveled leader, and oftentimes not included in some of the commentary, some of the historiography when we speak of the Garvey movement. We know the truth. We would be remiss to then overlook the reason why we were able to have publications that still are available now, like the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, volumes 1, 2, and 3, edited by the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's second wife, Amy Jacks Garvey. And I like for persons to like nurture these concepts and nurture these thoughts because there's so much more information that we are able to have shared and to bring to the table in terms of what we can do that are actionable deliverables, actual work efforts in our respective communities that build community, that strengthen the educational institutions in our communities, that offer support for self, family, community, society, humanity in a broad scale. And the fact that from very humble beginnings in the Isle of Jamaica, that the UNIA ACL spread globally with divisions all across the earth in virtually every continent. We know that there's 5 continents. For those that keep saying that Australia is a continent, we will do the geography lesson of what is an island versus a continent at another time. But of the 5 continents on the earth, has been records, documentation of divisions of the UNIA, ACL, globally. So when we speak about African American Black History Month, or for some just Black History Month, or for persons like me, African History Month, and I like to say African History Year because it's all the time. It requires every day. There's so much, not just the information for the sake of utterance, but information that strengthens our skill set, strengthens our wisdom, strengthens our resolve of the importance of our inclusivity in global affairs, in national affairs, in regional affairs, and to take this particular time in this particular era, in this particular season, to expand and explore some of the greatness that we are afforded in these times. I would like to also highlight that there are several pieces in this particular message I share, just in case persons do not have the familiarity with one of our esteemed leaders in this space of the Caribbean, specifically coming out of the newest republic in the Caribbean. Still, others are in the making, we pray. But out of the republic, the sovereign republic of Barbados, which has just recently had a very powerful election on February 11th, 2026, with Her Excellency Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley of the Barbados Labour Party winning. The word landslide would come out, but I'm going to pause on that. I'm just going to focus on the fact that Her Excellency Prime Minister Mia Motley of the Sovereign Republic of Barbados successfully won yet another term as Prime Minister of the Republic of Barbados. Applause is an understatement because most persons throughout this region claim her as our Prime Minister, even if our structure, if governance doesn't have prime ministers, it may have governors or may have presidents, right? I think it's really important to know that her leadership has remained exemplary. And again, never would I say that any leader is perfect. We're still human. So there are things that many will support and embrace, and there's things that others will not. However, I'd like to highlight that through the reporting and legacy building that has been presented by the ambassador from Barbados to CARICOM, and I will always highlight His Excellency Ambassador David Commission out of Barbados. And I want to share something he had put out globally. And for those that have a soft skin, close your ears. But for those that are willing to embrace perspective that is broad and wide, just listen to what I share here. Not from me, but from His Excellency Ambassador David Commission, Esquire. Make sure I highlight that. He's an international lawyer. with a host of other experiences, phenomenal published author, loves creative arts, engaged in youth program. I could go through, I'll do his bio another time and have him come as his schedule permits. This is our wake up call. In his recent speech at the Munich Security Conference, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio portrayed the USA as a white nation that was exclusively built by white European people, Italian explorers, English settlers, Scotch and Irish frontiersmen, German farmers, French fur traders, and Spanish ranchers. Rubio found no place in his version of the USA for either the presence or the contributions of the native or indigenous people of America who originally owned the country, the enslaved Africans upon whose labor the nation was significantly built, or the later Asian, Caribbean, Mexican, and other Latino and Mestizo contributors to the national strength of the USA. As far as Rubio is concerned, the USA is exclusively white and European, an integral component of so called Western, red is white, civilization. These are some of Rubio's exact words. Quote, for the United States and Europe, we belong together. We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are connected spiritually and we are connected culturally. Armies fight for a people, armies fight for a nation, armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending, a great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to be the master of its own economic and political destiny. For 5 centuries before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires, extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti colonial uprisings that would transform the world. Against that backdrop, then, as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end and that our future was destined to be a faint echo of our past. But together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before, and this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. That is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who, together with us, are willing and able to defend it. An alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interests, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny, not one that exists to operate a global welfare state and atone for the purported sins of past generations. An alliance that does not maintain the polite pretense that our way of life is just one among many, and above all, an alliance based on the recognition that we, the West, have inherited together, something that is unique and distinctive and irreplaceable. Unquote. I think persons need to hear and go back and watch that part of what I just read. And if persons question, just simply Google search, Google Scholar preferably, so you get some citations and show the accuracy of what's being said, and listen, because that's one thing I am grateful for about POTUS 47's administration. They broadcast everything. They even broadcast things they shouldn't broadcast. In terms of talk about violating national security, that I think it's also important that persons move and look at some of these comments that are coming out from the CARICOM platform. And I think when I speak of CARICOM, I'm speaking of the Caribbean community and the heads of state of the Caribbean community that make up CARICOM, and quite recently with their various regular meetings of the Conference of Heads of Government. And this particular quote was shared parallel to this that I've just shared from His Excellency, the Honorable Ambassador of Barbados, David Commission. And I quote, this is coming from the Honorable Dr. Terrence M. Drew, who is the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis and the chairman currently of CARICOM. And quote, CARICOM is not a talk shop. It is a platform for action. The 50th meeting must move us beyond conversation and into concrete, measurable outcomes that advance food security, climate resilience, regional security, and economic growth. Unquote. And I share that because those are the things that are coming out in this region. And I'm hoping that persons recognize that when we speak of the Americas, we're not only talking about the 48 contiguous US, Alaska, Hawaii, and the 5 colonies that America still governs. We're speaking of Canada, North America, Central America, the Caribbean Isles, South America, and everything in that Western Hemisphere. Let's say to the west of Greenland, which is a whole other conversation. That's another broadcast in terms of what's happening with Greenland and whether or not the Pirates of America and their respective armada can control that island as well. I think it's important for persons to just be aware when we're commemorating, reflecting, observing, celebrating African American Black History Month, Black History Month, African History Month. It requires 365 24/7 just for us to compartmentalize what are the solutions, what are the actionable deliverables, what are the things that need to be done. Not just, I love that conversation from the Honorable Dr. Drew, Prime Minister Drew of St. Kitts Nevis. CARICOM is not a talk shop. It is a platform for action. And I encourage persons. There are many people that question these different formations. There's people that question all of the different organizational platforms. That's something that we're very good at. We're very good at questioning platforms and then taking resolve in spending a significant amount of time in the argumentation element and the definition element, which can interfere with our ability to getting significant efforts and work completed. So we're working in a direction to move beyond the chat. Not that the chat is bad. We need to reason, deal with knowledge, percolate, nurture, cultivate wisdom teachings, get the narrative correct, have things vetted, and move forward. Study without action is futile. Hence, many of us were trained as organizers in our respective communities in our respective nations, societies, regionally, internationally, to do the research and speaking and writing and expression and marry that with organizational, actionable engagement that is implemented, because then you can test things and move things forward. Just a slight suggestion. The other part that I would be remiss in not offering tonight as we get ready to close, because the intention was to keep tonight's. We had a slightly late start, and we're looking forward to highlighting certain things. But I think it would be important. There were a number of broadcasts. I encourage persons to look at some of the archived recordings and broadcasts of Good Morning Barbados, because there are a lot of very important issues happening in the region that are frequently covered in that daily broadcast. Just look for Good Morning Barbados. I think it's important to see these things and to highlight some of the conversations that have been had. I also would be remiss if I did not share a particular series of statements that were offered to us through a number of our brothers and sisters that do work in not just the Caribbean Isles, but in Central and South America, in those spaces that do impact our society indirectly as well as directly. And I had another message, but I'll come back to that. I think it's really important to share some of the open correspondences that have been engaged. And we're also highlighting some of the ways in which, if there's any way that you can contribute to the crises that are happening around the world, whether it's in Sudan, Cuba, Haiti, Palestine, West Papua New Guinea, Congo, and the list is longer. This is a very serious time. And so I'm going to share this very concise point here that has been offered with and to us. And some of this is coming from open letters where persons are really asking to all, and I quote, to all of humanity, to the mothers of the world, to Doctors Without Borders, to journalists with dignity, to the governments that still believe in justice. My name is like millions of others. I don't have a well known surname or hold an important position. I'm an ordinary Cuban woman, a daughter, a sister, a patriot, and I write this with a broken heart and trembling hands, because what my people are experiencing today is not a crisis. It is a slow, calculated, coldly executed murder orchestrated from Washington, and the world looks the other way. I want persons to let that simmer and percolate for a minute. That a woman residing in Cuba, where there's been an embargo over 60 years, just imagine that. No boats with food or medicine, no tankers with fuel and other resources for utilities, limitations on communication and transport, air, boat, or otherwise, before, during, and after Category 5 hurricanes that have become more frequent and increasing in intensity. There is no FEMA for Cuba. I like persons to just think about those things, and I'm going to pause there because this is going to be part of the conversation that we're going to take up when we return on March 5th, unless we are gifted with a bonus podcast. There's so much that's going on that there's so much to share. I encourage persons to, if you have questions, comments, or a recommendation, if you'd like to join on a podcast, that's possible too. And that would encourage you to reach out to the Crew Podcast, our visionary, Queen Angela. And that way you can get more information on what's involved in having you be present on a show. And it doesn't have to just be that which is hosted by me. There are many other hosts that are part of the group podcast season 4. This has been Queen Mother Dr. Chinzira, your host for Oz Speaks, Building a New Legacy. There's so many other points of reference and points of engagement to discuss. We always remind people that culture heals humanity, land is our foundation, and spiritual harmony unifies us. I hope persons that have questions will email them to ASTSPEAKS, that's Ost Speaks, at gmail.com, or put a message inside of Oz Speaks either on YouTube, on Facebook. For those that wish to reach me directly, you can also find me at Chinzira Kahina. I'm probably the only Chinzira Kahina, unless it's bought, and I'll respond swiftly. If you have questions, commentary, and uplifting ideas that are linked to actionable deliverables. Until our next broadcast, be safe. I'll say that again, be safe, live well, and remain free. Our liberation is now. What's up? Peace.